Madam Speaker, before you this afternoon is the Government Savings Bond Amendment Bill 2019. The objective of this bill is to amend the Government Savings Bonds Act, Chapter 7141, to make provision for tax-free government bonds to be issued to facilitate the purchase of Housing Development Corporation, or HDC houses, and to increase the total value of bonds issued under the Act. The proposed amendments to the Act are premised on government's policy objective to provide increased access to adequate, affordable, and decent housing to the general population. A concurrent policy objective of the amendments, Madam Speaker, is to encourage individuals to implement a savings plan towards the purchase of affordable housing by offering an attractive and easily accessible investment instrument that will enable persons to attain home ownership in the shortest possible time frame. By way of background, Madam Speaker, the Government Savings Bonds Act was enacted in 1962 to authorize the issue of savings bonds, to declare the terms and conditions applicable to the bonds issued, and to provide for the rights and the securities of bond holders. The Act was subsequently amended by Acts number 50 of 1982, number 103 of 1983, number 11 of 1988, and number 14 of 1995. The Act at present provides for the issue of 4 different types of savings bonds, namely government savings bonds, national tax-free savings bonds, tax-free housing bonds, and national savings bonds. In the case of government savings bonds, national tax-free savings bonds, and tax-free housing bonds, regulations have been made under Section 8 of the Act, which prescribe the particular aspects of each type of savings bond. Government savings bonds regulations were introduced by Government Notice number 88 of 1962. National tax-free savings bonds regulations by Government Notice 2016 of 1977, and tax-free housing bonds regulations by Legal Notice 157 of 1988. Tax-free housing bonds were introduced into the Government Savings Bond Act by Act No. 11 of 1988. These legislative amendments appear to have been intended to facilitate a system under which tax-free housing bonds were to be issued by government to individuals, the proceeds of which could be utilized for the provision of mortgage facilities by approved mortgage companies. This system was supported by consequential amendments. Madam Speaker, I set a noise down. So, yeah, I know it's my people.
Minister of Finance?
I'm being disturbed, Madam Speaker.
As a seasoned member, I know you will not allow yourself to be disturbed. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I said, tax-free housing bonds were introduced into the Government Savings Bond Act by Act No. 11 of 1988. These legislative amendments appear to have been intended to facilitate a system under which tax-free housing bonds were to be issued by government to individuals, the proceeds of which could be utilized for the provision of mortgage facilities by approved mortgage companies. This system was supported by consequential amendments to the Income Tax Act, Chapter 7501, to Section 8, which treats with exemptions to income tax, and the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, in the 5th schedule, to provide a tax benefit to approved mortgage companies, and was facilitated by the then National Housing Authority. Madam Speaker, in January 2015, by the Finance Act No. 2 of 2015, the National Tax-Free Savings Bonds regulations were amended in Regulation 9 to significantly decrease the interest rates of that category of bonds from 6% for 5 years, 7% for 7 years, and 8% for 10 years to 1% for 7 years, 1% for 5 years, 2% for 7 years, and 3% for 10 years. The stated rationale for this decrease was that they were out of line with current market interest rates. And Madam Speaker, this information can be obtained from the Hansard in the House of Representatives. However, Madam Speaker, on coming into office, this government recognized that there was a paucity of low-risk investment opportunities with attractive returns open to the average citizen. Persons such as pensioners and hard-working, tax-paying people who do not have a significant amount of money to just put aside in investments offered by commercial banks and other financial institutions with little or no returns. Therefore, this government introduced national savings bonds by the most recent previous amendments to the Act done through the Finance Act No. 3 of 2016. Those amendments were aimed at addressing in part the consistent annual decline in ordinary Trinidad and Tobago dollar savings deposit rates by enhancing the availability of the Trinidad and Tobago dollar investment grade instruments across various points on the yield curve, thereby stimulating domestic savings to finance investments. These national savings bonds have an attractive maturity profile of 3, 5, and 7 years, and attractive interest rates accruing at 6-month intervals of 3% for 3 years, 3.5% for 5 years, and 3.75% respectively for 7 years, payable upon encashment of the bonds. Continuing in the vein of providing a much-needed stimulus to our domestic capital market, while at the same time providing greater accessibility to housing, it is now proposed by this bill that a new category of bonds be established under the Government Savings Bonds Act, and that is HDC housing bonds. And I stress HDC housing bonds. This is primarily intended to address a situation with public housing. These bonds will have the added feature of the ability to be used directly for the purchase of a house from the HDC, whether as a down payment or substantial payment. It is also proposed, Madam Speaker, that these HDC housing bonds be tax-free and that there be no limit on the value of the houses purchased utilizing HDC housing bonds. The particular aspects of the HDC housing bonds will be set out in regulations to be made under Section 8 of the Act. I now turn to the specific provisions of the short bill before us, Madam Speaker, and you will see that it is indeed quite a short bill, Madam Speaker. The Government Savings Bond Amendment Bill has just 5 clauses, Madam Speaker. And Clause 1 is the standard short title of the bill. Clause 2 is the interpretation section of the bill, which provides just an interpretation for the word Act, which means the Government Savings Bond Act. Clause 3, Madam Speaker, will insert a new Section 2B into the bill to the effect that the proceeds of the sale of tax-free HDC housing bonds issued under the Act will be applied solely for the purchase of housing from the HDC by individuals. And I want to stress again, this is only for public housing. This clause is to operate notwithstanding Clause 2A of the Act. The rationale for this provision, Madam Speaker, is to allow for the mechanisms currently under the Act related to tax-free housing bonds to continue, and that is with respect to bonds that will be used for mortgage payments, to continue to operate, while at the same time making provision for the issue of these new HDC housing bonds, which will be available for use for down payments and to make payments to the HDC for houses. As I mentioned earlier, the Act currently provides for 4 categories of bonds, one of which is tax-free housing bonds. Tax-free housing bonds have been previously issued under the Act to facilitate the purchase of housing through mortgages. Pursuant to Section 2A of the Act, the proceeds of tax-free housing bonds shall be applied solely for the provision of mortgages to individuals for the purchase of houses, but the possibility exists that there still remain some holders of these tax-free housing bonds that were issued some years ago. I will go into, in a little while, Madam Speaker, the information I have with respect to the bonds that were already issued. And let me deal with it now. In 1962, bonds with a tenure of 12 years were issued in an amount of $6,780,068. In 1978, bonds with a coupon rate of 6% were issued in an amount of $6,259,500. In 1983, bonds to a total of $5,941,850 were issued at a coupon rate of 6%. In 1986, bonds totaling $6,819,800 were issued. In 1988, bonds totaling $18,341,100 were issued. In 1992, bonds totaling $14,842,850 were issued. In 1993, bonds totaling $14,430,450 were issued. And in 1994, bonds totaling $12,841,850 were issued. Let me just recap, Madam Speaker. The way the text was is a little confusing. So let me go back. In 1962, 6.78 million. 1978, 6.26 million. 1983, 51.9 million. 1986, 68.0 million. 1988, 18.3 million. 1992, 14.8 million. 1993, 14.4 million. And 1994, 12.8 million. And it appears after that, Madam Speaker, for one reason or another, the use of government savings bonds and housing bonds fell into abeyance. And we intend to revive it at this point in time. So that there may still be some people outside there who hold tax-free housing bonds from years ago, and we need to protect them. Clause 4 of the bill will amend Section 3 of the Act to attain 3 objectives. Firstly, the Minister will now be authorized to issue both transferable and non-transferable bonds. The Act as it now stands only authorizes the issue of non-transferable bonds. In other words, they can only be used for one purpose. This amendment is necessary, Madam Speaker, or by one person. This amendment is necessary, Madam Speaker, to allow for flexibility in the issue of bonds so that where necessary, for example, to facilitate the purchase of housing, bonds may be transferable. And where it is desirable for bonds to be not transferable, they will be issued in a non-transferable form so that the government now has flexibility. Clause 4 will raise the current limit for the issue of savings bonds from the current $2 billion to $3 billion. The Act was most recently amended by Act number 10 of 2016 to raise the limit from $300 million, as it was then, to the current $2 billion ceiling. The amendment in 2016 was made to facilitate the introduction of the National Savings Bond under the Act, as I mentioned earlier. Consequently, since it is proposed that an additional new category of bonds be established and issued under the Act, it is necessary to again raise the limit. This is necessary so it will be feasible for the government to issue more than one category of bonds at the same time, or issue bonds during the tenure of a previously issued bond without exceeding the limit. Finally, Madam Speaker, Clause 4 of the bill will amend Section 3 of the Act to allow for the limit under Section 3 to be amended as may be specified by the Minister of Finance by order. The final clause will amend the schedule of the Act in Part A to insert the new category of bonds, HDC housing bonds, and in Part B to provide that tax-free HDC housing bond regulations be enacted to govern the issue of tax-free HDC housing bonds. As is the case for all bonds issued under the Act, it is intended that regulations be enacted to prescribe the aspects of the HDC housing bonds, including matters such as the interest rate, maturity profile, encashment of the bonds, authorized fiscal agents, where and how bonds may be purchased, and matters related thereto. Now, Madam Speaker, the underlying purpose of the matter before the House is to create 2 situations, Madam Speaker. Firstly, it is the intention of the government to create a revenue stream for the Housing Development Corporation. One of the things that has humbugged the housing development effort over the last many years, through all governments, has been the availability of funds, because it has been a challenge for all governments, I would say, over the last 20 or 30 years, to allow persons who occupy HDC houses through the rent-to-own system or through the license-to-occupy system. It has been a challenge for all governments to convert those persons from rent-to-own or license-to-occupy into a mortgage situation where the full proceeds for the sale of the house come to the Housing Development Corporation. The way the system is supposed to work, Madam Speaker, as the government constructs houses and persons get their mortgage loans through TTMF or otherwise through the commercial banking sector, then those funds would be the feedstock for the construction of new houses. But unfortunately, over many years, for all sorts of reasons, it has proven a challenge to get that steady income stream coming in so that purchasers of houses now will provide the funding for the construction of houses in the future. So this government has decided that it is necessary to provide the HDC with a steady stream of funds in this way through the issue of HDC housing bonds. When persons purchase these bonds, they will be able to keep them if they wish, or they can accumulate them. We're doing it in this way to help the little man, so that persons will be able to buy bonds in, say, denominations of $1,000. Someone may be able to accumulate one bond a month, and therefore over a 3-year period, Madam Speaker, at $1,000 a month, someone could accumulate $36,000 in HDC housing bonds, and then use that $36,000 worth of bonds to purchase a HDC house for the down payment or towards the purchase of the house if they cannot otherwise qualify for a mortgage of the amount required. So we're issuing these bonds really to help the little person, the person who does not have a lot of money and can only put away a certain sum on a monthly basis. And this allows them over a period of years to accumulate sufficient money so that they can pay the down payment or pay towards an HDC house. Because one of the challenges we have found in this government, and all governments have found this, is that the majority of persons who are desirous of obtaining an HDC house can't afford it. The majority of persons who wish to purchase a HDC house fall into the rental category when an assessment is done of their income and their ability to pay to purchase a house. So that there's a large body of persons outside there who are seeking to obtain an HDC house who simply can't because they don't have the capital and they don't have the income stream required. So this measure is designed to encourage people to save, because that's another issue we have in this country. There's no ingrained culture of savings for housing, and therefore this is to encourage people to save towards an asset which they would have for the rest of their lives, and also provide the income stream to the HDC, Madam Speaker, because the proceeds of these bonds will be given to the HDC to give them cash flow to continue their construction program to complete the houses that they have under construction. And housing is not cheap, Madam Speaker. The annual cost of housing, for example, in 2015, Madam Speaker, the expenditure on housing under the previous government, $1.75 billion, and that's typical of the kind of money that is required to be put into the housing system. We have not had those kind of, in 1 year, $1.75 billion. And that is under you. So, Madam Speaker, don't ask me how many houses you built. I'm not sure you built any at all. So, as a Madam Speaker, I won't let them distract me. So that the yearly cost of the HDC program in 2015 was $1.75 billion. We have not been able, we do not have the funds from taxation on incomes and profits and other sources of government revenue to spend at that level. I can tell you in 2017, this government spent $1.27 billion In 2018, 1.21 billion, and in 2016, $807 million, Madam Speaker. And that is the cost of the housing. That's the cost. I'm simply giving this information, Madam Speaker, to show that significant funds are required in order to continue the government's housing program. The HDC has told us it has a budget of $1.8 billion per year, which is what they need over the next several years to complete their development program, to complete ongoing projects, to complete houses under construction, to complete projects that have been approved for construction, to acquire land for new projects, to construct infill housing on existing housing estates, and to do refurbishment and retrofitting. The figure given to us at the Ministry of Finance is $1,828 million, is what the HDC has told us they require over the next year in order to continue the housing program to deliver houses at an affordable price to the population of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. But in terms of revenue, Madam Speaker, the mortgage conversions and rental and so on, and sales, the HDC revenue is significantly below that. For example, when the former administration expended $1.75 billion, or committed to expend, because we inherited a lot of debts, that 1.75 is in fact expenditure and commitments made by the former government in 2015, that 1.75 billion, the revenue of the authority was only $554 million. So there was a shortfall in 2015 when you had those expenditure and commitments of 1.75 billion for HDC housing of over $1 billion, Madam Speaker, $1.3 billion shortfall in funding for the HDC's revenue, for the HDC's construction program. In 2016, the HDC's revenue was $479 million, and in 2017, there was an aggressive push on mortgage conversions, and I must congratulate the Housing Development Corporation for this, because when you look at mortgage conversions in 2015 was only $31 million under the last government. Under this government, mortgage conversions in 2016 rose from 31 million to 166 million. And then in 2017, they rose again from 166 million to $350 million in 2017. So the HDC's revenue grew from 554 million in 2015 to 884 million in 2017 because of a push towards conversion to mortgages under this administration. But it's still not enough. When I look at the revenue went up to 884, but the expenditure and commitments are of the order of $1.8 billion, Madam Speaker, so that the shortfall is between $800 and $900 million a year if we are continue the momentum for public affordable housing, HDC housing in this country, and Madam Speaker. And all of us who are, Mr. Deputy Speaker, those of us who are parliamentary representatives will know that one of the most significant requests made to all of us as MPs is for housing. When people come to see you in your constituency offices, there are certain categories that you can tick off: employment, housing. Sometimes housing is before employment when people come to see you and so on. And that's because there's a need, Madam Speaker. There is a need. And a responsible government has to deal with the demand and the requirements of the population. So we are launching this amendment to the Housing Bond Act, and I can tell honourable members now that the housing bonds will be at attractive interest rates. One of the interest rates that we are considering is similar to the NIF bonds, where you got 4.5% over a 5-year period. That's the kind of range we have in mind, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the first issue of HDC housing bonds. We're still looking at whether we should issue 2 series, 3-year and 5-year, because there will be some people who would prefer a shorter time frame for the investment, and others would be prepared to save over a 5-year period. But we're looking at 4.5% for the 5-year bonds, and maybe a little less than that for the 3-year bonds. But this will still be significantly more than what is offered in any other form of investment outside of the National Investment Fund, NIF bonds, which is an innovation of this government. So that we expect over time, Madam Speaker, because this requires a lot of education to the population to get them to understand that when they invest in these bonds, not only will they be getting attractive interest rates over the period that they are saving, so that at semi-annual periods, persons will receive their interest on the bonds as they continue to save. They can reinvest the interest in the bonds, or they can take the interest for their expenses and so on. And in addition to getting interest at attractive interest rates, they'll be able to accumulate savings which they can use for a down payment for an HDC house. Because as I said, that is one of the main challenges that I can speak as a member of Parliament. Many of the people who come to me can't raise the down payment for an HDC house because they're simply at the lower end of the income level in this country, Madam Speaker. So that this is not a complex bill. It is simply adding a new category of bonds called HDC housing bonds to the original existing government savings bond system. These bonds will be issued in the near future. As soon as this legislation is debated and passed in the other place, the Minister of Finance will make the necessary regulations indicating the tenor of the bonds, the interest rate, where persons can purchase bonds, because we intend to make this as simple as possible for everybody. So there will be a number of authorized agents, primarily banks and so on, which will be authorized to sell these bonds on behalf of the government. Of course, the HDC itself may be eligible for this, so that the availability of the bonds will be made easy for people, and we intend to go on a marketing and an education program to encourage people to save towards the purchase of their own home, Madam Speaker. I beg to move. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move.